Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video we're going to be talking about how to set up a basic save game system for a Unity 2D or 3D game. So for the tutorial, I'll be demoing this very basic scene I've set up, talk about this game control object, and dig into the game control script. I'll also be sharing this script, which currently contains save functions and load functions. Next video is load, of course. So the basic concept here is that the way I have things set up, in every scene we would have a game control object, which is basically the manager for everything that occurs in the game, and should have data that carries over. And then all of the data is put into this serializable object called game data. And the game data contains basically whatever you want to save and manage, possibly while the game is running at the same time. It's up to you whether or not you want something like the serializable game data to basically manage all of your data while the game's currently going, or if you only want to create it while you're trying to actually save the file and then get rid of the data because it's all stored in an XML file. It's completely up to you whether you want this serializable object class to actively hold the data that's currently running as the game goes on, or the properties for accessing that data, or you can just have these objects only be created and used at the time of saving and loading, and basically neglect it at any other time, and then store the current health or the current player name somewhere else in your game. So let's go ahead and play this scene. We have a giant save game data button, a very bland text box that says waiting for save. So when we hit save game data, we get a console message, game saved to the location on my computer, which, by the way, for Unity games, if you're saving to the persistent data location or source, whatever it's called, that's generally going to be app data, and then local or local low, then the name of the creator or the company, and then the name of the game. And then whatever you want beyond that is extra. And one really important thing to note here is that when we hit that save game data button, the way I have it set up is that the last save file, last save time, and saved scene fields inside of the game data object are written. So we have the save time, we have the scene that we were on when the game was saved, and we have the file name. So that Joe file name, that's just coming from the game control object itself. So that Joe file name, that's just coming from the save button, where I just manually put in the parameter, a string for the game name. However you want to get that name of the game, that's kind of up to you, but in a lot of cases you would have some kind of user input prompt, like a simple pop-up dialog box that asks, what's the name of the save file? So the way most people seem to recommend you have a game manager class is to set it up as a singleton instance, which means that it doesn't delete itself between scenes. You can only have one of them, and it persists as you navigate through the game. So you have one game manager and it's always there. And I think that's a pretty good idea. We won't talk much about the singleton practice in this video, but just thought I should mention that. And the other fields that the game control class holds is the game data object, which is serializable. So we need a serializable object so that we can actually write the data to a file. So we're using XML Serializer in this class. There's also binary formatter or binary serializer. And those, of course, require your objects to be serializable, because we're taking the data from the game and we're writing it to a hard file format. I've also currently got a reference to the currently opened scene, and the reason for that is that it recommends in Unity that you do not try to get the current scene name all the way down here when you are serializing things. So the idea there is just don't get the scene name in the game data class, but instead I'm getting that when we change scenes. The save path for the save file is primarily determined by application.persistentDataPath. This is going to vary depending on what operating system the game is running on, but this is kind of cross-platform because basically if you're on Windows, it's going to give you the Windows address, but if you're on Androids, it's going to give you the right directory for an Android save file. And then on top of that, I appended a custom folder, saved games. When it comes to file management inside of Unity, most of the methods you're going to be calling come out of the file class. So checking if the file exists, you need a path basically to that exact file, including the file name and the extension. Delete, which obviously deletes that file. There's also directory.getFiles, which will return a list of names of all the files that are in the directory you're checking for. So with these classes, the general idea is we have all the data ready to go, or we write a couple extras to it like the current save time. Then we check if a file exists in the current location or create a new one if it doesn't. We save all the data to it with an XML Serializer. So anyway, moving on to how you actually save the game. I have this method here called save game. The first thing it does is checks if the save directory has been created, because remember I have a custom part of the path, which is the saved games directory, so that has to be created first. We're going to ensure that the game has a save file name, and it should be unique, unless you're trying to overwrite the save, in which case you would use the same one. But if it's a new save, you cannot use the same file name for very obvious reasons. So what you might do, which I was doing in generate new save name here, is that if it finds that the file currently exists, but you're trying to create a new save, then what it'll do is it'll append the number of the current attempt onto the end of the save. So that would mean initially it will try to save it as Joe, and then it will be Joe 0 or Joe 1, and then Joe 2, Joe 3, until it finds one that actually works. This kind of method is only necessary if you think you're going to be automatically creating file names rather than allowing the user or the player to put in their own file names manually. Next, I have this update save data method, which takes the game data and applies a couple pieces of new information, like the name of the file, the save file, or the name that it's going to be, the current date time, stored as a binary, and the active scene. Then we piece together the full save path, which includes the name of the file and the file extension. We check if that file exists, and we create it if it doesn't, or we just open it for writing if it does. And then using XML Serializer, we can create a XML file. So this takes basically a type of object that you're going to be serializing to a file, and that in this case it's the game data object I created, which we'll talk about it a little later. Then we open up a new text writer object, and we use that to serialize all this data and write it to the And then we take the serializer we created for type game data, put the game data object in, and use the text writer to basically take that data. After it's serialized, write it to the file, and we close the file off. So the remaining thing we need to talk about in this video is the game data object. It has to be made serializable if you're going to serialize it to a file. And primarily what it concerns is a bunch of public fields that we can obviously access from other classes. And we take these fields, and primarily what this object consists of is a bunch of fields which we access, change, and use to save to the actual save file as the game runs. So before you save this file, it should contain all the up-to-date information that you actually want to load when the game loads. So for instance, if the character's health has dropped during the course of the game, you need to make sure that somewhere you would update this. You could also just have it be a reference to the actual character's health. So whatever information you think needs to be persistent as your players load and save the game, that's going to need to go here so that you can serialize it properly. One of the things that I think will be pretty common for people is to have a vector of the player's current position. So the problem with a vector is that you cannot serialize that. So in order to have a vector, the data of a vector be saved properly, what you need to do is you need to extract the XYZ coordinates of the vector, and then store those separately. So generally only primitive data types are actually going to save properly to the XML file, so you have to be careful about that. Anything that's complex is going to need to be broken down. So one last thing you're going to need somewhere in your code, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the game data object, but the ability for your game to set up initial stats. So that could be the health of your character, the fact that it has 0 experience points, the name of your player, which you might actually set up not when you launch the game, but after you hit new game, and then it's like enter your character name. So right here, this basic solution is just to have some default data, and then at the top up here, we should actually have this default to a new game data object, just the default constructor, so that if we haven't loaded data yet, these are the defaults that are going to be applied to that initial game data object. So that's going to be it for this video. I'm going to leave the code that was featured in this video in the description for you guys to try out. Should be able to get it working. You just need to call the save data and load data methods from the class. Obviously you need to attach the game control script somewhere too. So that should be enough to get you going. The next video is going to be how to load games, and I will see you in that video.